Hi everyone, my name is Martin Koehring. I'm the head of the Economist Group's World Ocean Initiative. Welcome to the first World Ocean Summit Insight Hour, talking about the post-coronavirus ocean economy. Where do we go from here? This is a part of a series that we are putting together at the World Ocean Initiative to really bring the big topics in the ocean economy together, continue the conversation that we wanted to have at the World Ocean Summit in Tokyo in March. That unfortunately couldn't happen because of the pandemic. But we're very keen to continue the conversation and to keep the momentum going on really building a sustainable ocean economy. So this webinar is part of a series of webinars. The next one will be on the future of seafood. You can see the details on your screen as well. There are opportunities to sponsor these webinars as well, so you can get in touch with our colleague. The contact details are also on your screen there as well to discuss those opportunities. I'm also very excited to say that today is also the launch officially of our World Ocean Summit next year. So in 2021, the 8th annual World Ocean Summit and Expo will take place in Lisbon in Portugal. It will be a very, hopefully, of course, we're monitoring the situation closely. Hopefully we'll be able to meet again physically as well at the World Ocean Summit, which is the global premier event really to bring together ocean stakeholders from business, from the world of politics, from civil society to discuss how to build a sustainable ocean economy. And next year we'll be talking about how to accelerate a sustainable ocean economy. So we'll have 2.5 days of conversation, hopefully, and then more than 2,000 attendees and more than 200 speakers. So hopefully we'll be able to meet in person again next year. But in the meantime, we are meeting here through online resource, and hopefully you'll get familiar very quickly with the surroundings, with the tools that you have here. So a couple of housekeeping issues. So we have a Q&A function for questions that you can ask our panelists. You can also see related information, related events, and there's also a couple of resources there on the World Ocean Initiative, on our newsletter, and on the World Ocean Summit. You will find all these on your screen in front of you. You can see on the media player, you can see today's panelists. You can see the Q&A function. Please send your questions throughout the session. You'll have an opportunity, and our team will have a look at them, and then they come to me, and we will have a conversation about them. So feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, so we're very excited to start this conversation. We have a lot of people that registered, more than 1,000 people registered for this webinar. So we're very excited to have you all here to discuss what's going to happen in the post-coronavirus ocean economy and where do we go from here. So in terms of the structure of today's conversation, so first of all, we look a little bit at the impact of the pandemic on the ocean economy itself, so the direct impacts that we are seeing. And in the second part of the conversation, we look at the post-pandemic ocean economy. So will it be less sustainable? Will it be back to pre-pandemic? Is there an opportunity to become even, to actually take some opportunities and make the ocean economy more sustainable? And in the third part, we'll hopefully discuss a little bit the pathways to getting to this transition to a sustainable ocean economy. How can we kind of get this sustainability in the ocean economy back on track? How can we restore momentum? So today I would like to welcome our panelists, a very high-level panel of experts and very well-known figures in this space. We're very excited to have here Peter Thomson. He's the Special Envoy for the Ocean at the United Nations. We have Karin Kemper, who is the Global Director for Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy at the World Bank. And we have Lars Robert Pedersen. He is the Deputy Secretary General at BIMCO, the largest ship owners association. So why are we here today? Why are we discussing this topic? So we have, of course, the impact of the pandemic, which crosses all sectors of society, of the economy. And the Economist Intelligence Unit, which is one of our sister organizations, forecast that global output will contract by at least 2.5% this year. This is a worse result than during the global financial crisis. And then the World Trade Organization expects global trade to also fall by up to a third because of COVID-19 and disruption in supply chains, in economic activity. And the ocean economy is severely impacted by this. Of course, we have key ocean industries such as shipping, fisheries, tourism affected. Around 90% of the world's cargo moves by sea, and obviously we have disruption of supply chains. Fish provide essential protein for around 1 billion people. We have lots of people that, in lockdown that can't go on holiday. Tourism has come to basically to a halt. There's also a risk that the pandemic will threaten progress in areas such as, building a blue finance infrastructure, investment in ocean energy projects, continuing the decarbonization of shipping, for example, building a sustainable aquaculture industry, and also policy priorities towards, for example, climate in the ocean, these kind of things. But now the shift has been obviously towards healthcare and welfare, which is very much understandable. But what does this mean for the ocean economy? So there have already been calls for a green transition. For example, the EU leaders have called for a Green New Deal. The European Commission really wants to press ahead with these plans for a sustainable finance strategy. In the US, we have talks about green stimulus packages to really address some of the issues in the economy, but also to really bring the economy on a more sustainable footing after the pandemic restrictions have eased. But to what extent does the ocean economy really benefit from these kind of fiscal stimulus measures? And there are concerns that really this return to this blue momentum that we have seen will kind of not materialize because of this. So today we'd really like to discuss these questions with our esteemed panel. And I'd like to start with the first part of the conversation, which is really about the impact of the pandemic on the ocean economy. So how the pandemic affects plans to build a sustainable ocean economy. And I'd like to start with Peter and ask him how we can build kind of a broad coalition of governments for ocean sustainability without the ability to bring them all together, together physically, but we have to go through virtual events such as this one. So how can we still make progress happen in these circumstances? Peter?
Thanks much for that, Martin, and thanks to the Economist World Ocean Initiative for organizing this, for all the great work that you're doing in support of the Sustainable Development Goal 14, the ocean goal, conserve and sustainably use the ocean's resources. I'd really like to also thank all the listeners. I understand there's up to 1,000 people registered. And can I just say that, just by the very act of tuning in to events such as this, you are being part of that movement towards the implementation of SDG 14, which is, during these challenging times, the way we've got to do things, momentum going. So to all of you listening in, stay safe and stay positive. Nobody's giving up on this. As we say in Fiji, tambu soro, no surrender. We will get this job done. I'm a grandfather, and when I look at what's happening in the world, I do believe that my grandchildren's security will be met by the sustainable blue economy. That's where they'll get their medicines from, it's where they'll get their food from, it's where they'll get their energy from. But only if we treat the ocean with respect that it deserves, so that we have a healthy ocean. To answer your question, Martin, I don't foresee problems in getting countries together to do what we have all agreed to do in 2015. And I'm referring to the Paris Climate Agreement and to the Sustainable Development Goals. There's no impediment on us convening the way we are now, and as the months go by, we'll be able to get together in the so-called world as well. Although I would imagine not in the way we did in the past. We'll be having hybrid conferences. Not everyone will need to be there, but those that do need to be there will. I'm very confident of that. In the meantime, we've got this virtual space, which is turning out to be every bit as busy as the real space, if you like it. For example, World Economic Forum and Friends of Ocean Action have got virtual ocean dialogues, which are coming up in the first week of June to fill the space that the postponement of the UN Ocean Conference has caused. But that is going to be a packed week where high-level people, the world's best experts. We're getting together in 8 virtual dialogues over the course of 5 days. So yes, we are getting together, we are progressing, keeping the momentum going. And in the meantime, of course, look up in the skies, and we're saving a lot in terms of carbon footprints. You've asked me to keep to 3 minutes, and I think that's my first 3-minute bash, so over to the others.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Peter. I mean, it's great to remain optimistic in these times, and the conversation continues, as you said, through virtual channels such as this one. So I'd like to go to Karin to ask, her what her opinion is on how the pandemic affects plans to build a sustainable ocean economy.
Well, thank you, Martin, and thank you for the World Ocean Summit to invite me, and also to organize the series of webinars. It's really exciting to be part of this and to know that there are over 1,000 people connected, and that we are having this discussion, including the questions and answers later. Your question about how the pandemic affects the ocean economy, it has, of course, enormous effects, like we are seeing overall on the economy. It's disrupted really the lives and the livelihoods and communities everywhere, and the ocean economy is really no exception. So in the World Bank, over the coming 15 months, we are going to make available some $160 billion in financing, all across the sectors, of course, with the health sector as a first entry point, and overall economic support as another one. But we are also specifically looking at the social impacts that come about through the pandemic. And part of it is, of course, the overall economic downturn, but the other part is also how do people, especially in developing countries, deal with the risk of the infection and the social distancing. So some of the things that we are seeing are in the fisheries sector. We are seeing things in the tourism sector of how they have been impacted. Just to give you an idea, approximately 10% of the global population derives its livelihood from fisheries. And that is not only the fisher folk that we imagine who are actually fishing, but a big part of the value of fisheries comes in the post-harvesting value chain. And there you have very high levels of female employment. It's over 50%. So it's a picture that we don't really very often think about. So we see now that there are disruptions in the logistics chains. Fisher folk and people in the post-harvesting chain don't get their fish to the markets. And that is a big, big impact. We see that everywhere, of course, in the developing world and in the developed world. The other issue that we are seeing is that in tourism, as Peter just said, or no, as you just said, there's people cannot go on vacation, they cannot go on holidays. So a lot of the, call it the blue tourism part, has been affected, with everything having coming to a halt. And as we know, there's a lot of tourism, especially in the coastal zones, because people like beaches. And you've got the hotels affected, the hotel chains, but also all of the jobs that people have in these coastal areas. And especially, for instance, in small island states, you've got a lot of states where GDP is over 40% of GDP depends on tourism. So you can imagine the impacts there that you have. So certainly we have a lot of impacts. We have a bit of a short-term plus side, which is that nature is a bit less disturbed due to all of that, and that we can see as an opportunity as we try to get everything up and going again, which I'm sure we will be talking about in a moment, where we can see how we can build back better or build back bluer, as I like to say, and take a little bit advantage of an otherwise very tough situation.
Yes, thanks, Karin. Yes, I mean, you already alluded to the logistics challenges and, the supply chain, the post-harvesting chain and these kind of things. So I'd like to go to Robert as well to ask you about the logistics, supply chain issues and so on that you are seeing in the shipping sector. So what are the biggest impacts you are seeing?
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to be a part of the World Ocean Summit web conference here today. This is really a great honor and a very distinguished panel. Shipping is certainly experiencing its part of the crisis. All sectors of shipping is seeing shrinking cargo amounts being shipped. The tanker sector is engaged deeply in floating storage of oil, simply because the market is overflown with supply and with demand in total destruction all over the world. So it's really demand destruction is the key word we see. Nobody buys anything really at the moment. Raw material, energy, finished goods, everything is on a decline. Passenger transport, both at sea, on land, and in the air is almost non-existing. So all these things, of course, impact shipping very much, because traditionally shipping has had a very close correlation to the development in the global economy. A certain percentage raise in global GDP could be translated into a certain percentage increase in demand for shipping. This has been so historically, and it continues to be the case today. So yes, shipping is under great pressure at the moment, with little to do. So this is the normal effect we see in shipping. It's the effect every day of an industry that is totally demand driven. But a very special effect of the COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, is really that we effectively at the moment have about 150,000 seafarers out on ships around the world, effectively imprisoned on board the ships, simply because they cannot leave the ships at the moment. Countries have closed down their borders. The airlines have ceased to fly between cities, between airports. So these people cannot be relieved from their duties on board. The crews who are at home at the moment, awaiting the next assignment, they cannot pick up that assignment and effectively are without pay for some considerable time. So this is a kind of a hidden consequence of the pandemic that nobody talks about, but which we are doing a lot of work to try to solve. But I must also say at this point in time, it's really, really difficult to solve this when every government in the world have closed their borders and every airport in the world have no flights leaving. So we are in a situation which is getting more and more desperate by the day.
Yes, thanks, Robert, for highlighting some of these, effects on the shipping sector and on the people that are affected in the industry. I'd like to ask the audience now as well to get involved by asking a polling question. And can we have the first poll question? This will be about what impact do you think the coronavirus pandemic will have on the sustainable ocean economy? So this is really about whether you think we are seeing a mild effect, medium, severe, and very severe effect. So please have a look at the screen and answer this question to give us a little bit of a glimpse in terms of what you think, because I can imagine that you will all have seen the results of the of the pandemic for your industry, for your company. So it would be really interesting to see what you think, and also after having heard Peter, Karin, and Robert as well, to see where we are with optimism or pessimism about the economy. Okay, great. I think we have an interesting response, so I think we can have a look at that. So you can show us the results, please. So we can see that most people think, almost half, that there will be a severe effect on the ocean economy, and well, about a third think there's a medium effect, but more people think there's a very severe effect than a mild effect. So clearly, the audience agrees that the ocean economy has been severely impacted by this. Any surprise from any of the panelists? Have you expected this, Robert? Given, for example, what is happening in shipping, that people see a severe effect.
I think this is a reflection of the severe effect that the pandemic have on almost every human on the planet. I mean, it is a severe effect we see in our daily lives, and we know in our daily lives how much change this has brought about. So transposing this onto the implied effect on the ocean economy, this does not surprise me at all.
Mm-hmm. And Karin, do you agree? Do you see this as a severe effect?
Yes, I very much agree. And if anything, I might consider it, at least at this moment, as even more severe than what we are seeing in the poll.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, do you agree? I mean, you were quite optimistic in the beginning, saying that there we can continue the momentum and everything. Are you? Do you agree that there is a severe effect, or are you a bit more optimistic, or do you see things differently?
No, to be totally transparent, I took part in the poll and I pressed severely affected. Hey, can I just use this moment, Martin, just to thank Robert for bringing up the plight of seamen. Some of our audience are from governments or have connections to governments, and people are trapped on ships because of this pandemic, really sort of forgotten people, but there are tens of thousands of them. And all I would say to the ports where these mariners are marooned at the moment is, please allow communication systems to be made available to them so that they can communicate back to their home countries and their homes. And by the way, in the process, hopefully, those that are subjected to dreadful conditions like slavery at sea will be helped if you give them better communication systems while they are restricted in the way they are. So thank you for bringing that up.
Great, thanks for highlighting this. I mean, it's definitely a human tragedy. Often we talk about the economy in very abstract terms, but actually there are lots of people trapped. Lots of people have lost their jobs. And speaking of industries, I'd like to go to the next polling question, because we'd like to know from you which ocean-based industry will be negatively affected the most by the pandemic. So we'd like to ask you whether you think it is offshore renewables, fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, tourism, or offshore oil and gas. We'd like to know from you whether you think any of those sectors are particularly affected, so we can see a little bit more, kind of get a flavor in terms of the sectors that you think are most affected. So it would be great to, let's see if you have already had a chance to submit. So please start submitting your answers. What do you think, Robert? Do you think shipping will be one of the top ones?
Well, there is no doubt that shipping is very severely affected. As I said, it's closely related to the economic development in the world. But actually, when you look at tourism, I think tourism has basically come to a halt. I mean, there is no one is traveling anywhere. And communities around the world which are deeply dependent on tourism, they have not seen a decline in their turnaround on this. They have basically seen the total destruction of their economy, which depend on tourism. So I actually think personally that tourism probably is one of the really severe affected sectors.
Okay, great. Let's have a look what the audience thinks. I think they very much agree with you. Almost 71% say tourism is the most affected, and then we have fisheries as well with 10%, offshore oil and gas 7%. Shipping 6%, and less so aquaculture and offshore renewables. Okay, so that's anything interesting there that you'd like to comment on, Karin, in terms of when you mentioned tourism before, and you also mentioned fisheries in terms of having 50 million people employed in fisheries and lots of people being under threat of losing their livelihoods. Anything surprising for you here?
I would very much agree with this poll, Martin. I think the big challenge on tourism is what comes next in the other areas, and that includes shipping. The issue is to keep things afloat, no pun intended, to make sure that things continue and then they can pick up again. As you've seen from the overall economic forecasts, there's a big dip that is forecast overall now, but then the assumption is that it will get up again. In tourism at this moment, we don't know where it will go. And so that effect of not knowing what we can expect, how to rebuild tourism, that is really a great, great challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes sense. So now the big question is exactly what you mentioned in terms of rebuilding and where we are going after this pandemic, and whether we will be going to a more sustainable, less sustainable way, or whether we are just going to go back to business as usual. So in this second part of the conversation, I would like to turn our attention to the global economy and returning to business as usual. A lot of people are saying that it would be great to return to business as usual when pandemic-related restrictions ease, but what would that mean for the long-term transition to a sustainable ocean economy that we talked about? We talked about some of the trends already that we have seen towards blue tourism and sustainable aquaculture, decarbonization of shipping, these kind of things. So are we going to head for a less sustainable, equally sustainable, or even more sustainable post-pandemic period? We mentioned earlier the European Green Deal, which includes a lot of measures that could kind of support this kind of green transition to a kind of that could benefit the ocean as well. I mean, in terms of investment in renewables, for example, or in sustainable aquaculture, these kind of things. There's actually a study by academics from the Oxford University recently that was published in Oxford Review of Economic Policy that included the Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, for example, as well, that talked about the benefits of green stimulus projects compared to traditional stimulus, such as the traditional stimulus that we saw after the 2008 global financial crisis. So because some of those green projects could actually create more jobs, deliver higher short-term returns, but also lead to an increased long-term savings. So I'd like to turn attention to this topic in terms of the post-pandemic recovery, and I'd go back to Peter, because you had mentioned that you were optimistic about returning to some of those UN meetings and also some of the developments that have been happening. For example, the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development that will be happening from next year. So I would like to ask you what you think, whether the global economy will return to business as usual when pandemic-related restrictions ease.
Well, yes, thank you, Martin. Personally, I'm not somebody who ever thinks in terms of business as usual or normalcy. I don't think we ever go back. Change is a constant in good times and bad. But let me say this, that I think we're at a very special moment in the 21st century now. I'm not referring to being in the pandemic. I'm referring to the glimmer of light that we see at the end of the tunnel that we've been confined in for the last 2 months. And that glimmer of light, when we get out into that light, we either go on the low road or the high road. And the low road is obviously the tempting one to take, because we've got low fuel costs at the moment, and it's very easy to go back to all your old patterns. But the trouble with that low road is it brings you back to the entrance to the tunnel again in the future. And we don't want to be back in this tunnel again. The high road is what I call the blue-green recovery road, and wonderful to see things like the EU Green Deal out there. That recovery road, you know, obviously there are challenges there. There's steep slopes and all the rest, but it brings us to the kind of world that we want our children to live in, which is a resilient world, and it's a place ruled by sustainability. So that high road is the one we've got to take. And why I say we're in a special time at the moment is that this is the moment when the decisions are being made and the seals are being put on the deals, these multi-billion financing deals that Karin was just talking about. And we have to make sure that all the banks and the corporations and the governments are absolutely not allowed to wash their hands of the long-term responsibilities involved in making these decisions. They can't do that in the name of short-term expediency. They have to be thinking in what is best for humanity in the long term when we're investing. So you were mentioning the troubles that tourism has got at the moment. Yes, awful situation for tourism. I come from Fiji. I'm one of those countries you referred to, the small island developing states that are so dependent on tourism for our employment and our foreign exchange. Well, in the meantime, I believe that the recovery funding should be going towards things that are going to be prized in the future of tourism, which is like replanting of mangroves, the restoration of coral reefs, the fostering of national parks and MPAs, all the sorts of things that people, responsible tourists in the future, will want to be part of, so that they too can show their respect for nature. So you can spend your money now, and it will enhance your tourism industry in the future, and it'll give people a lot of jobs too. So I do believe that blue-green recovery road, you know, which involves things like sustainable aquaculture and renewable offshore energy, you know, offshore wind. I was so happy to see that poll that people agree with me that sustainable aquaculture and renewable energy offshore can continue and shouldn't be affected by this. So that is the way ahead, and that's where our money should be going. And I'll be very interested to hear what Karin has to say about that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, let's go to Karin. So you already mentioned blue tourism as an opportunity and sustainable aquaculture. What is your opinion? Do you think the global economy will return to business as usual, or will there actually be an opportunity to go for this kind of a blue-green recovery road that Peter mentioned?
I certainly think, Martin, that there is an opportunity for a blue-green recovery, and that I very much agree with Peter. The way I see it is two things. One is the focus right now needs to be very much on supporting those economic activities that that need this support in order to pick up again very quickly. To give you an example, for instance, in Bangladesh, through one of our projects that we are financing there, we are helping some 57,000 aquaculture farmers to stay in business by ensuring production continuity, and we are helping with the logistics in order to avoid further market disruption of getting some 56,000 tons of fish to the market. That's absolutely important for these groups so they can pick up afterwards. We cannot let people lose their livelihoods and their small minor enterprises, which they essentially are, without being able to pick up. But then if we look at the longer picture, a longer term picture, we have opportunities to change a lot during the recovery. And one could be, for instance, to move perverse subsidies into other directions. Of the 35 billion, roughly, of subsidies that have been allocated to fisheries globally in 2009, for instance, only 16% went to the smaller scale fisheries that we know are much more sustainable. So why not use the opportunity of the recovery to rethink how we do subsidy policies? And we've been engaged a bit with the WTO in its negotiations on looking at where fisheries subsidies could go. Other areas are how to think about, for instance, in fisheries, how to look at overfishing overall. We've had a number of reports that showed that countries globally forego some $80 billion in benefits by continuing with a very high level of fishing and overfishing. If there was less fishing, actually, they would be able to harvest more money in the long run by harvesting actually less fish. And again, there would be a way towards a different type of recovery. So there's a number of things that we could do as we look at things, and Peter already alluded to the stimulus money. We have anyway been thinking that there would be trillions invested in the blue economy writ large, everything from tourism to cities that are built along the shorelines to ports to all kinds of things. And the question would be, how do we want to use that stimulus money in order to make that into blue-green, as opposed to just gray funding as we would have done 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. If we are a modern society, we might want to think in a modern way and want to look at different types of infrastructure that serves our purpose in the future while creating jobs and livelihoods now.
Right, thanks, Karin. I think that there, as you mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity to use these funds for, this kind of sustainable infrastructure, sustainable fisheries, and so on. So that is really good to know, and that you're working in the World Bank as well on some of these projects. Robert, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the impact that the pandemic has on the shipping industry, and you mentioned some of the severe impacts on the crew as well, but also on the profitability and so on. But what do you think will happen, after these pandemic-related restrictions ease? Do you think the shipping industry will return to business as usual, or is there a different pathway?
Thank you, Martin, for that question. And I guess if I knew the answer to this, I would probably not be sitting here, but would be investing my money in the right shipping sector, for the future. But anyway, recovery is always a tricky question to answer, because, as I said earlier, shipping is very much a demand-driven industry. At the moment, demand is down, so shipping is also down. There is a lot of excess tonnage on the surface with little to do, and that affects the market because the balance between supply and demand is out of tune at the moment. We saw in the 2009 crisis that it took quite a while to get back to normal, and if we ever got back to normal, because actually what people talked about was a new normal. Because also what is happening in these decades, I would call them decades, is actually a change in the correlation between GDP growth in the world and transport demand growth. The trade multiplier, as we call it in our industry, is changing. It is lowering. So we see less demand for shipping for the same increase in global GDP. So this is a slow running transition that happens over decades. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but it actually means that we are coming back to something which was not the same. And I think Peter was alluding to that. There's a constant change, and yes, there is a constant change in the correlations out there. So the new normal we had before the coronavirus will be the old normal, because we will have a new normal when we come out on the other side, because there will be further changes in demand for seaborne transport. because the way the global economy is structured changes all the time. One of the things that we are learning as we speak is actually using the internet technology to an extent that just a few months ago it was possible, but we didn't do it. Now we do it. Everyone do it, massively every day. Kids are going to school this way as we speak, and these are likely to have lasting effects on our behavior in societies, and that will translate into a changed demand structure in the future for seaborne transport. So we believe there will be a slower recovery this time. It will take time to get back. We will get back to some sort of normality, because shipping at the same time will adjust its you could say the supply of ships out there will be adjusted, simply because the economics in shipping will dictate that some ships will reach their end of life before otherwise. So these changes will gradually make the shipping business more sustainable from an economic point of view.
And just briefly on the decarbonization, do you see that continuing? Because there's huge investment that has to go into that decarbonization. Do you see that continuing or even accelerating after the pandemic?
It's decarbonization is a very long-term transition in the industry that will happen over multiple decades. It's not something that will happen very fast. We have seen over the past decade a fantastic transition or decarbonization trend in shipping already since 2009 actually, and we think this will continue, not least because energy efficiency pays off in an energy-intensive industry like shipping. But there is only so much you can do in terms of energy efficiency improvements. At one point, you run out of these, you would call them low-hanging fruits, and we need to get into the deeper decarbonization techniques, which involves low-carbon fuels and totally different technologies. And these changes are not going to happen in the short term anyway, because we need to mature the technology to make it ready to deploy in ocean-going ships. And this is not necessarily easy. It will cost money and take time. And the shipping industry have actually suggested to IMO, the International Maritime Organization, that we should establish, or the organization should establish a fund organized by a board that oversees these technological developments, funded by the industry, by some payments in relation to the amount of energy we use, or you could say the carbon emission we have. So we don't really see at this point any delay or change in our views on decarbonization. It's something that will happen because it has to happen, and the timeline is pretty fixed for shipping. We know that we have to halve our 2008 emissions totally by 2050, and that's the site we have in front of us, and that's a goalpost, and we are bound to meet that.
Great. Yeah, it's important to remind ourselves that there are lots of processes that happened before the pandemic, and those things are still going on despite the pandemic. So we are at the time where we will soon move to questions and answers. But before that, I would like to ask a polling question that will be addressing some of the topics we have discussed, namely which ocean-based industry will benefit the most from post-pandemic recovery. I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the sectors that could see some of this money from the blue-green stimulus if it does happen, and that's why I would like to ask you for the next question, please, the next poll question, please, in terms of which ocean-based industry will benefit the most. So it would be great to see what the audience thinks about that. If we could push that to the audience, that would be great, and see what the audience thinks in terms of which industry might actually benefit the most from some of the measures we discussed, the European Green Deal and so on. What do you think, Karin? Do you see a particular industry that might benefit a lot?
That's a tough question, Martin. One could, it's hard to say. In the medium to long term, one could imagine fisheries if different policies are implemented. I could see that could actually pick up, because it could become more sustainable and therefore safeguard both ocean health and livelihoods and the economies of countries if there are policy changes.
Okay, great. Let's have a look at the results of what the audience thinks in terms of which ocean-based industry will benefit the most. So you can actually see that most of the audience actually think that offshore renewables will benefit the most. So we discussed offshore wind, but also tidal and wave offering new opportunities. Fisheries is mentioned by 16%. So a couple of people agree there. Aquaculture as well, and then less so tourism, shipping, and offshore oil and gas. Okay, great. We have run out of time for the conversation, but we'd definitely like to look at some of the questions and answers as well now. We had lots of questions come in, and please continue to submit questions to the panel. I'd like to look at one here now from John Mimikaikis from the Environmental Defense Fund. He is asking, can you talk more about the opportunity to rebuild coastal economies stronger, bluer, so that they recover not just from COVID-19, but also build resiliency to other shocks like climate change? Karin, what do you think? Is there an opportunity to rebuild coastal economies stronger?
I do think that there is that possibility. You could imagine all kinds of investments that could be made by looking at coastal economies in an integrated blue economy way. So, for instance, you could look at, as I said, fishing. I've already mentioned that. You could look at how you, in the medium to longer term, create for instance, work schemes that would stave off coastal erosion by looking at, say, mangrove planting and looking at green, blue type of infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure. So you would have an impact now because you create jobs for people, but it will help with future erosion and future hurricanes and future cyclones, for instance. The other thing that you could imagine is, as some of the pollsters here said, is on the offshore renewable side. So if there's an overall greener rebound in the economy, then that could help communities in those areas. So there's a host of things that one could do to build back in a more resilient way. One last thing is on waste management that we are putting a lot of emphasis on right now. One can imagine that with a big return to single-use plastics, that there's in already overtaxed waste management systems, that there will be much more that is coming to the oceans. And again, that is another impetus for countries to look at their waste management systems and to come up with better ideas on how to manage and how to recycle and what to do as second line products. So that should also be seen in an ocean lens and not only in a terrestrial lens, because there's a big interface. So lots of stuff one can do.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. We have a question here on what impact can we expect the virus crisis to have on availability of funding for ocean preservation initiatives? Would the Seychelles Blue Bond model be an option to help? Peter, do you see this happening more and more? This kind of, the ocean preservation funding blue bonds, such as in the Seychelles?
Absolutely, yeah. The Seychelles Blue Bond's a great model. Fiji, we've put one up as well. Look, I don't see impediments for blue finance. In fact, quite the opposite. I think as long as we get that message through about blue-green recovery, the funds will flow. And that message comes through very clearly in all the meetings that I have on such things as we had one with the World Bank last week on the sustainable, the sustainable blue economy finance principles, which are in place. I encourage everybody to have a look at that. When we were launching the Friends of Ocean Action Ocean Finance Handbook, again, the discussions around that, it's obvious that funds are going to be flowing into the sustainable blue economy. I think we should not underestimate the change which we're going to go through. I think, I just come back to that that point about change, and I was very happy to see the results of that poll where people were so confident about offshore renewables and about sustainable aquaculture, because I agree 100% with them. That is the kind of future that we're looking at, not returning to old grey ways, as Karin put it. And also, can I just say how happy I was to hear Karin say that the World Bank is looking at waste management, sewage, plastic, and so on. Because again, we can't go back to those terrible old ways. Look, I just want to give you a view of my living room, right? I live in a small flat in London, central London, and that space there used to have 6 horses in it 100 years ago. Why? All the houses down my street were stables for the middle-class people who lived on the next street. Within a few years, all that changed. Can you imagine the hand-wringing about employment and the saddles and all the rest? We moved from horses to the internal combustion engine in a very short period of time. My great-great-grandfather arrived in Fiji as a master mariner of a wooden sailing ship. But before he was dead, the whole world had turned to propeller-driven vessels made of iron and steel. I feel that we're on the cusp of paradigm shift, which the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years. We're going to move away from this dirty stuff like bunker fuel powering our global shipping fleet. We're going to move to renewable offshore energy sources, such as the windmills, which are being planned for the North Sea, which will give us all the energy we require. So this massive change is underway. And what Robert was saying about the greening of shipping, I believe that will happen far sooner rather than later. I mean, the technology is there for hydrogen, ammonia, and countries like Chile, which are preparing to become world powers in the supply of green hydrogen through using their deserts, as the Moroccans are thinking, for solar power, which is required to produce this ammonium to drive the global shipping fleet. It's going to happen, and we are not going to go back to our old polluting ways. I feel very positive about that.
Okay, great. That optimism is very good to hear. There's a question that is linked to this. Will there ever be the same demand for containerized sea transport post-COVID? Are supply chains really able to withdraw to regional, not international chains? I'd like first to go to Karin and then to Robert.
Well, that's an interesting question that I'd also like to hear from Rob answered. And you could imagine that there will be a rethink on how how much will be produced in countries and on the same continent. But I think at this moment, this is very speculative on how much the global supply chains will continue as they are doing, or how much will turn into local or regional production. So I'd love to hear from Rob what he thinks about it and what he's hearing from his people.
Yes, please, Robert, tell us.
Well, I think I have to repeat myself a little bit here, because as I've said actually more than once in this session, shipping is a demand-driven industry, and if demand for transport changes, shipping changes. It's quite natural. So any change in where production happens and consumption likewise will reflect into a change in demand for shipping, and shipping will adjust to that. I mean, that's quite evident. It has always done that, and it will continue in the future. So it's more a question of how do we believe the present crisis will change the way production and consumption in the world takes place. Will we see a shift of production closer to consumption for, you could say, for national supply security reasons? Those things are definitely at stake. We hear that in the country where I live, a lot of discussion about, how can we be more resilient as a country? And I'm sure this discussion goes on almost in every country in the world. Mm-hmm. But there are also other trends, and I think Peter alluded to this constant change that happens. We know that the younger generation, for example, seems much more attuned to not possessing stuff the way my generation and my parents' generation have been used to. You want to buy and own everything, so everyone have a lawnmower and a chainsaw or whatever, and all these things. But I mean, in the future, we might see more a trend towards you go down and rent the stuff when you need it, and of course that will translate into less consumption in society, and these kind of trends will of course reflect on demand for shipping in the future, and there are almost every trend you can think of at the moment somehow points towards lower transport demand in the future. The only thing that is probably not pointing in that direction is population growth, which is still on the rise. So the shipping will reflect what we as humans in societies decide to do with our lives.
Okay, great. Yes, I mean, it just shows how interlinked shipping is with many of our demands as an economy, but as individuals as well. We are coming to a close, so I'd just like to ask for the last polling question on what type of recovery will we see for the ocean economy. So this is the kind of a question that kind of summarizes in a way our conversation today. Do you think that we will see a less sustainable recovery? Will we have a less sustainable economy in the ocean than before the virus? Are we going to return to the business as usual, or is there actually this opportunity for this green-blue transition that we mentioned? So please answer this question in the poll, and then we'll have some concluding remarks as well. Before we get to the close, we do have one interesting question as well that I'd like to ask Peter, and I know time is flying and we're running out. So please answer that last question on what type of recovery will we see. And it's really interesting what is emerging here in terms of the answers. Could we push that live, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, but it's really interesting. Actually, 2/3 say that there's going to be a sustainable green-blue transition, and that's actually really interesting, isn't it? After our conversation, there is this optimism that actually many more people think that we'll have that potential for sustainable green-blue transition than less sustainable or even return to business as usual. So I'd like to ask Peter, as a kind of by way of closing to comment on this. And there was also a question on what case do we need to be making about the blue recovery to make sure regulators see the upside to building back better. So the combination of these results and this question, Peter, could you just give us just a very brief summary?
Thank you, Martin, and thanks to everybody who's taken part in this. It's been very stimulating, and I've learned a lot. I'm just so thrilled by the results of that poll as well. You know, I think this is the way we have to look at it. As far as the policymakers are concerned, just speak to the people at the World Bank and others who've done the sums, and you're just so much better off in a decade or 2 decades time if you invest now in that blue-green future. The people that do it now will be the winners of the future. So you know, give me 5 minutes with any policymaker, and I think we can convince them on that. But on this blue-green recovery, and as I say, thank you so much for that vote of confidence in it. You know, at its heart, it has faith in the genius of our species, Homo sapiens, to be able to innovate. You know, this is how we've got, you know, this thing of brain and thumb and finger. That's how we got from our Stone Age through to the Space Age. So during times of crisis like this is when we innovate better. And that's why you've got to be optimistic. We will come up with it. There'll be some kid in the back of some developing country slum who will probably be the next Einstein. Have faith in our powers of innovation, but also have faith that in times of crisis, we learn how to share better. So let's share better as well, and we'll produce that future that we so surely want for people and for planet. Thank you very much.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. And I know you're very much in high demand because I know you have another webinar to go to. So thank you very much, Peter. But I'd also like to thank Karin and Robert. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you very much. I think we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic despite the current pandemic. I'd like to remind you that we have future webinars as well. They're also available for sponsorship. If future webinars. The next webinar will be on Thursday, May 28th on the future of seafood. And of course, we have the World Ocean Summit next year in Lisbon. The website is already live. You can click on the link. You can already pre-register. We're really excited that we had this conversation, and we're very happy to continue the conversation in the upcoming webinars. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you soon again online and also hopefully in person soon again. Thank you very much. Please play the closing video.
Thank you.
Yeah, Raquel, I'm just coming off this Economist thing.